Hello, and welcome to Generation AI, the podcast where we demystify artificial intelligence in the world of higher education. I'm your host, Artis Kadu, and today I'm joined again by special co-host Petr Georgievich. Petr is the CTO of Element 451, and we're continuing our conversation on a part 2 on proactive AI assistance and AI agent systems. Hey, Petr, how's it going?
Hey, Artis. Thank you for having me back. Glad to be here and to continue this interesting topic. How are you?
I'm doing great. We are in the middle of planning and actually, building some really, really interesting stuff at Element on AI assistance. And you and I have been kind of banging our head, on the wall for this a little bit over the past couple of months as we start thinking about how do we kind of take the next stage of what we call AI assistants. And right now they're reactive, meaning that, a student comes into to a website and they can chat with an AI assistant with different personalities. A staff member can come in and they can build a full, marketing campaign in Element by telling you what they want. I can build a landing page or anything like that. But it's like they're proactive. Somebody has to tell them what to do. And, you tell them what to do, and then somebody has to initiate that action. Now, during our last episode, we talked about what's the next wave, right? We talk about these AI agents or proactive AI assistants that are analyzing things and analyzing data, and they're in the background and they're acting based on certain goals. So we've been banging our heads against the wall for this and trying to figure out, well, how does that fit, or how do we fit it into the Element ecosystem, right? And after discussing it for so long, it was like, duh, it makes so much sense now. It's like, why would we reinvent the wheel or build a different system? We already have all the pieces. It's just a next iteration of it. Sorry for kind of going into that, but I got really excited, and I want to start talking about how we're actually thinking about this problem in Element.
Yeah. So I had a funny talk with one of the people that work in Element, and as they were thinking of proactive assistance as well, it's Tai Fujimura, it's our chief product officer. So we were talking, how do we name them? What's the best name to kind of explain them for people to understand? And as we know, people are started doing using copilots. We actually had a copilot, which is now rebranded as a staff assistant. He said autopilots. so that's kind of how I see it. It's kind of certain processes running on autopilot, and that can be from defining the process to actually running the process, right? Because these are two steps. Sometimes you might want to define the process if you have certain business requirements that you want to lay down, but in some cases you don't know, and that's what we were thinking. Like one of the cases of people buying Element, they know what they want to do, and they know how to use it to solve their problems. Sometimes they will come and say, we don't know. They will say, yes, our team can help them, but they think, hey, can we find a consultant, or can we pay your team more if to spend time with us to implement certain processes and tell us what to do, what are best practices. So if you think about this, can AI solve that? Can AI be an expert that can tell you what to do and potentially design a process? So those are the types of things we were thinking. And then this also comes back to, I want to just do a little analogy. It will all make sense. So sorry for taking a little bit longer. But it turned out, as AI started coming along, we saw it as a tool, we want to use it, but we were like, okay, we don't want to add it just for the sake of adding it. We wanted to find a problem that actually can be solved with this. And similar to that, one of the problems that people have or were coming to us was like, hey, can you offer professional services? Because we might not be the expert marketers, we might not be expert writers, we are not the expert designers. We need to find an agency. Can you be that agency? Well, we are in the business of making software, right? Not in providing the professional services. So, and it was hard to automate. You can't automate that part, right? At least not before. And then when GPT-4 came and it opened up this whole world, this thing opened up that you can actually automate giving professional services, giving advice. And now taking all that into thinking hey, we want to build something that proactively does something. Well, we already know that, hey, this thing can act as a subject matter expert. If this thing has access to right data.
By this thing, you mean AI and LLMs?
Correct.
Okay.
The proactive assistant that we were calling it. So we have all the building blocks in place. So if you think theoretically, there's no limitation to actually implement this, right? There are practical concerns that we will go deeper, but in theory, we have everything set up. The ground is there. And now we just need to think what's the best user experience, how much control we need to give to the kind of controlling user, because not everybody will trust this thing to run on its own. So those are the things that we need to go a little bit deeper on.
So, for those of you who are just joining this conversation on part two, I highly recommend you go to part one of this conversation to kind of understand a little bit about what we're talking about and the AI systems or the proactive AI systems that we're talking about that are kind of sitting in the background and kind of doing work and then what that means. Now, what Petter mentioned, I really like that analogy. Essentially, AI so far has been a co-pilot. It's like, write me something or do a task for me, and you're telling it exactly what to do, but it's there. You mentioned this idea of human in the loop versus human on the loop, right? So human in the loop is the co-pilot approach. It's like you're telling it what to do, you're collaborating with it back and forth, and then you get something done. Whereas the autopilot is you tell it a destination. Think about an airplane, an autopilot. You plug the destination in, and it's actually managing all the controls, is monitoring the weather, is monitoring the altitude, the speed, all of the different components that a human would do, right? Normally, a human would monitor all those gauges, and then it's monitoring all those things and it's making predictions, it's making calculations of what to do next, right? In real time. And it calculates all those things and it kind of makes a decision of what to do next and next and next and next in order to get to the destination. Did I explain that correct?
Yes, but you still, when you need to land the airplane, you need to be able to turn it off and to have control, right?
Correct. So there is a pilot, in the seat that can always take control of the autopilot. If it doesn't like something, or if it needs to adjust for bad weather or for whatever it is, things that are more complex, or the whole trust idea, right? It's like, okay, let's just leave the autopilot when we're really high, and then we're going to take the controls when we're landing the plane versus when we're taking off. So human, that those tasks are a little more complex, and then now you give it a destination and a goal, and that it handles everything else for you as if you were doing it, but you're not in the loop anymore. You don't need to be in the loop.
You don't need to, but you need transparency, right? You need to see what it's doing to be able to make your own guess, right, and then decide. Because systems, right, every system can also break, right, and can have faults. So having that type of control is really important. And nowadays the systems have evolved where you can actually build these to have a AI running on its own, and you kind of like inspecting its output and deciding do you want to interject or not. And one of the things that's also really that how would you scale this approach, right?
Oh, we have to build it first before we scale it. So
Sure.
all right. So you're going to be the technical expert today, right? You're going to be the technical, like you're going to go deep into this. And now I'm going to ask about like the problems, and then you'll kind of play not play the technical expert, but you are a technical expert. So when we think about like how we're doing this in Element, so the problem that we're trying to solve, and one of the things that you mentioned before is since the inception of Element or a student engagement system or marketing automation system is this idea of how do we personalize communications and how do we personalize outreach and engagement with the student, but make sure that is at the individual level, right? This whole idea of a segment of one. So when we communicate with that student, where we take them through a journey of their educational path, that can be how do we take them from a prospect to an applicant? How do we take them from a applicant to an admitted student? How do we take them from that first day of class to the end of the semester when actually getting that grade for that first class, or the end of the first semester, the end of the first year? So how do we take that journey and personalize it and provide either nudges, or we provide help and we remove friction and we provide help throughout this whole system? So when we take a look at that, because we our DNA is in marketing and our DNA is in enrollment and marketing, most of the time we start thinking about those use cases first. And in this case, it's let's take a student that we're trying to move from them coming to the website from a prospect. Let's say they just filled in an inquiry form on our website. How do we move them from an inquiry form to send them to apply to an application, right? So how do we move them from a prospect to an applicant? And that's sometimes done by a communication plan, and somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm going to, as soon as that student hits submit on that RFI form, I'm going to send them a message to say thank you. That message can be a little bit personalized if we know their program that they picked. Maybe, I mean, that's wishful thinking for a lot of schools, but
Yeah, yeah, depends how you approach it, right? If you have a staff member that will actually go and analyze every student and send that email, right?
right. So we're saying current state, right? We're talking about the problem with the current state.
Sure, and this is the problem. You don't have a staff member to analyze every
Exactly,
student.
exactly. So that comes into somebody's email box.
Right.
So that's what we've been doing. It comes to somebody's email box.
And the current state is that you do it at mass, right? There's no other way. You personalize at a certain, like, we call it at certain group, or we call it a segment in Element. So you would detect people of certain characteristics. That being, hey, they expressed interest to this RFI form. That can be a characteristic, right? And one of the things that you would get in that form would be, hey, what's their intended program? And then you would write same looking email, right? That you might have depending on the tool that you use.
But it's preset. But those are preset.
It's preset.
Those are campaigns that you already built.
Yeah, you preset, and you would say, hey, if this is the program, there's this text. If this is the program, there's this text, so you can pull it dynamically. But you don't have a lot of options other than that right now, right? And that's the current state of the industry.
Right. So let's go through that journey, right? Let's take
go.
through that journey, and you can provide some of the technical components. So like the student comes in, fills in an RFI form. What happens? Like we trigger a workflow in Element.
So yeah, I'll use Element as an example, but I'll try to use wording that everybody can understand.
No, that's fine. We're talking about Element and how we're solving this. So let's stick with Element.
Sure. So Element has a forms module where you can build your own form to ask any type of question that you want. One of the questions can be what's your intended program. What Element also provides, every time you submit that form emits an event that we call them triggers. These triggers can start certain business processes. In this case, the trigger is, hey, this specific form was submitted, and it can trigger a multi-step process that can run over time. It's unlimited, like it can run 2 years if needed, or it can run just do one communication and stop.
We're calling that a workflow.
We're calling that a workflow. And workflows in Element are used to map out marketing campaigns. And specifically in this case, it would really a marketing campaign would be to send a couple of communications in a certain frequency.
Whoa, you're getting way ahead now. Hold on. Let's slow down. Okay. So somebody fills in the form, a trigger happens, they get enrolled in a workflow. And now as part of that workflow, somebody had to think about what do we do? The first thing that you do in that workflow, the first step is let's send them a message to say, thank you. We received your inquiry. Somebody will reach out or will do whatever it is, something, right? So that's the first step. Now, some schools or somebody might have the ability to then go in and we can label that student a certain way. We can add some additional data to that student depending where they came from. But also we can trigger an internal, like we can assign a task for a counselor or somebody to give him a call. So it's like, hey, you got to give him a call right away within the next hour or the next 2 days. So we assign that task, say call them, and the due date of that task is 2 days from now. So the workflow is doing that. And as somebody who's orchestrating these touch steps or this journey, like they have to be built explicitly in the workflow. So the first step is you send them an email. Maybe you personalize it a little bit because you know what their program is. And then you have some variations in there around different programs. The second step is give them a call. And then the third step is, hey, send them another message to talk about a different topic. And a fourth message can be, okay, now send them an SMS message because they never responded to their emails. And a fifth step can be call them again. A sixth step can be send them another email to drive them to apply. A seventh step can be send them another SMS message. So you get the point, right? It's like somebody has to orchestrate this whole workflow and all the different steps that need to happen. They put the content in, right? And then they need to say put the timing. But in the meantime, if that student actually started an application, right? Like unless you specifically put that into the workflow, the student might have gone in and had a phone call with the counselor or replied back to a conversation and said, oh, you know what? I'm going to apply, but I'm applying through the Common App. I'm not applying through Elements. So, but we don't know that. So that workflow just continues, right? Or that data is still there. So that's the problem. So now somebody has to build those flows. And I would say that the majority of the time of bringing up a CRM system or a marketing automation system or doing marketing or engaging with these students is actually building those workflows. And somebody has to be knowledgeable. Like that's when you mentioned, it's like, hey, somebody needs to be knowledgeable in order to become a marketing expert, to write those messages, to orchestrate the different flows. And 90% of the work of implementing it, it's in that.
It's a lot of opinions, right?
It's a lot of opinions.
And when it's enough, when do you stop, right? And if again, another point of this problem, another dimension whole is the input can be really wide, right? The student, every student is different, right? So one student might be local, one student might be coming from abroad, right? So whole different process needs to apply. So how do you adapt to all these cases? Like, do you detect them up front? I don't think that's possible. You might have, 4 or 5 buckets that you might be thinking of, but there's maybe hundreds more hidden beneath. Where if you tweak your approach a little bit, would it eventually result in a much better outcome, right? But do you have that much opinions? I don't think you do. or even if you do, can you actually encode them, right, in any type of software? That's the problem. Like, there's a lot of opinions. There's a lot of things that you need to think of.
What's the longest workflow that you've seen?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
So somebody has to think through 2 years of what a student would do, or somebody in that system needs to do. Probably hundreds of different steps as part of those 2 years.
And imagine how many emails might have been sent out that shouldn't have been sent out in that case as well, or how many effort was spent that shouldn't have been spent. And then that's the reality. But the good thing is there's ways to solve it, right? And then that's what we're talking today.
So when we look at this, like, you have all these different steps, and the first thing we did originally to eliminate this was our notion of how do you let AI build all these different steps, right? That's what we have right now.
Yes. So in Element, there's a group of AI assistants that you can use. Each one is a special, kind of has its own specialty. One that we have is kind of like a campaign assistant, which is also a marketing expert. And its whole goal is to kind of like teach you how to build campaigns, but also build a whole campaign in Element for you. And that same campaign can also be built that lasts like 700 days if needed. And can give you advice, but also can...
Whoa. Hold on. 700 days.
No, let's not go there. So that's what we built initially, is we built a staff assistant that's able to guide you through this process, because this process is daunting. Some people were spending maybe 2-3 months sometimes with a marketing agency to do this, but with the AI assistant, you could have a working campaign in 1 minute, and that was already a huge improvement for the whole process. So the improvement here was huge because you have rapid iteration speed. You're learning through the process as well. You're becoming a marketing expert because you have an expert telling you what they're doing and why they're doing it. And the only thing you need to provide is like your high level goal and like, hey, I want to target this type of people, and then this is what I want to market for. I want to push them to apply. And then even if you don't give it enough context, it will tell you, hey, can you please give me this enough context, because this is the type of questions I need to be able to complete it. And the whole thing is because this is AI, it's not snarky or something. It does not try to feel you less, but it tries to teach you. It's really accommodating. So even if you don't know what you're doing, it tries to guide you to the process and kind of hold your hand.
Let's try to be as helpful as possible, right?
As helpful as possible.
These LLMs, like, that's their job, to be as helpful as possible.
Correct. But again, even though this is amazing, and I know every time I demoed this to somebody, they were wowed. But if you still think it creates a campaign initially on a single input, right? You say, hey, this is the things I need. It will create you all the marketing material, all the personalization, all the copy will be written, everything will be designed. But still, then stays at time. Then it's kind of like left to you to maintain it going forward, right? So it all depends on your expertise. It's static. You need to go back and kind of like live with it. There's nothing static. What if the campaign is created on the fly, and not for a group of people, right? But for the person that you're looking right now. And we call it a segment of one. Can you run a marketing campaign at scale for a segment of one personalization? So take in million students, try to communicate with them, each one to be totally personalized to their own current situation, wherever they are in the funnel, whatever their preferences are, taking everything into consideration and deciding what to do next. And if you think from Element perspective, right? Element has a lot of tools, right? You have different ways to interact with students, right? You can send them email, SMS, WhatsApp, you can call them. And also we collect a lot of information, right? All data they enter to their application, they're already an applicant, a lot of analytics, when are they opening their emails, etc.
What pages they viewed, everything, what tasks they closed, all of that.
Or for example, if they applied and you have their application review process and your staff is looking and giving comments, there's a lot of information hidden in those in notes, in comments, right? There might be some tasks that you completed before, or also some comments. So, and there might be a lot of conversations. Student might come in on the website and give you some important information somewhere in some hidden chat that happened a year ago, and they're only applying now after a year later. Or maybe this is like a student coming back. So there's a lot of information available, scattered through.
It's all in the profile. I mean, it's all in the student profile. So when you go there, you're able to see that.
Yeah, but as a person, you need to be able to analyze a lot of data at once.
Yes, that is true.
Right? It's proven people can do that, right? Given you give a good UI, you surface that, but every student is different. So how can you build the totally dynamic UI to surface data? It's really hard. But what if you use AI to analyze the data? And we were talking in the previous episode, and you can listen there. We were talking about long context, where you can put a lot of data to the LLM to analyze. It takes a little bit more time to process, but these things can run in the background. So what if you have an LLM and you give it all these signals? You give it like some comments that your staff has made about the student. You give it the preferences of the student. You give it their current funnel stage. And also you have your overarching goal of what you try to accomplish for the student. Could LLM potentially decide what to do next? Yes, it can. Yes, right? If you give it a list of options, what to do, right? And those options can be do nothing, right? This is all good. Or the option can be send them an email, send them an SMS, potentially call them, right? You mentioned the example, hey, you need to create a task for a person to call it. Well, with the current advancements in the AI can also talk now.
Yeah, with the voice components. Yeah,
with the voice components. So you now have a kind of like a person, a recruiter, for example, that could actually kind of call the student to try to recruit them. But based on all these signals that you have already stored in the platform, right? Human would have much harder time to analyze that for every single student. That's why I said initially, do you have a staff member to analyze each one student? Like take a look at their record fully and decide what to do? You might do that, but how many can you process a day? Maybe 100, right?
Maybe less than that, yeah.
Maybe less than that. But what if you have a system that goes in and tries to process 1 million of them, and tries to kind of like act on that? So that's what we're trying to build with proactive assistance here.
So when we go back then to our workflow analogy, that student comes in through an RFI form, they enter a workflow, but now rather than those workflow steps being predetermined, we're saying that you're going to have an AI assistant, a proactive assistant that is going to write those steps on the fly.
Correct. And not write all the steps. Just needs to write the next one.
The next one.
Right, the next one. And when does it need to check up again what's going on, right? Because a lot of this problem is a time-based problem. Right? If your action is send an email, responding to an email or the state changing based on that might happen in a few days, right? So the AI, what it needs to do at the moment of analysis, decide what to do next to accomplish the goal for that student, but taking everything into account, all the data it has, and then also deciding when to potentially wake up or when it's fulfilled, right? And you can think of it, a dummy approach would be hey, sleep, 5 days, for example.
Well, that's what a workflow does.
That's a workflow that, yeah, just sleep, for example. But it can be much smarter as well. What if the AI decides, hey, sleep or wake up if the student responds to an email? Or because I've sent an email and if they respond to this specific email, wake up. But don't wake up for any other email. Like I'm only interested in this one. So these types of kind of like tunnel vision, all right? Even though that's a bad comparison, but having that level of control, that's what the proactive assistant can do. Like decide what to do next, decide when this thing is completed. If it's not completed, and then you can proceed and proceed and proceed.
So we had an analogy during our last episode. We talked about wearables and how it kind of compares. So you have hundreds of these proactive assistants that are sitting in the background, but you're only bubbling up the thing that is the most relevant at that particular time. So what you're saying is that we have a lot of expert, proactive assistants or AI assistants in the background, but we give it a goal, and that goal is land the plane or go to this destination, right? And then it's doing a lot of those things. But if there is bad weather, or if there's an engine, or you're running low on fuel, or something is interrupting the flow, then that bubbles up. You're saying that we're going to have a lot of these assistants. So they're managing they're looking for things to wake up. Like, what do I do next? So as they're looking from the student and they're looking at all the data, they're waking up and they're saying, okay, I have all these things that I could be doing or that are bubbled up. I'm going to take all of the input of all these different assistants, and I'm going to have an assistant that is orchestrating towards the goal and saying, what's the best thing to do right now? Because I could write an email, I could do this, I could do that, and then deciding what to do now and actually delegating the task to that assistant who is really good at it. So is that what we're talking?
Yeah, you are going even deeper.
We said technical. We're going to go technical here, deep.
So at a high level, to easily understand, you can think of it as a single AI assistant initially, but there's no reason that when this runs for even for that single user, even at that scale of millions of them in parallel, there's no reason that AI assistant cannot delegate to others. And as we talked, they can work in teams. So if you're writing an email, there can be an email expert that knows how to write a really good email and to personalize it. Or for an SMS, or you will need a specialized AI assistant to do a call, right? Because for the voice handling capability, that's already a specialized AI. So that's an implementation detail, right? It's just that there needs to be an action that needs to be taken place, and that action can be handled any way you want. From like just even a static email, but you can even use AI to generate a dynamic email. But the more important problem is that high level one. Like the high level orchestrator is the most important one. And one thing that I think is important to mention is this is just a single intent running, right? We said initially, hey, student submits an RFI form and it goes into the process of like trying to recruit them, but they might be doing a lot of other stuff, right? What if, for example, you have a AI assistant that helps them apply for financial aid, or like a intent to help them apply for financial aid that can run in parallel, right? That can run in parallel. And third thing can be that same student might be trying to find some information for their brother to apply to some other program, for example. So there's nothing limiting this, that it can run multiple kind of like agendas at the same time for the single student, and each one being taken a really close look, right? And that's the really exciting part of this technology, right? How else before we'd be able to do this, right?
So in this case, one of the things you mentioned before was we might be sending out a lot of communications because we don't know what other departments or everybody else is doing. But in this case, because the next step takes into account the whole context of the user, it knows exactly what the other assistants did because those are recorded as activities and they're recorded as communications or whatever into the user object. So it's like saying, oh, I know what John did. I'm going to pick up the slack or I'm going to do the next thing. Like if a human were to do this, they would have the whole context in their head and know exactly what everybody did, and then decide, okay, for my task, if I have to send a communication out, I know that another communication was sent out yesterday by admissions, and that communication contained a message that told them to apply for financial aid. I'm not going to send them another one today because that message has already gone out. So rather than me writing that message, I'm going to go to sleep and then figure something else out.
Correct. And not just, hey, it sees the what communication was sent, but also the reasoning why it was sent, right? Because we did mention a chain of thought as a pattern of like improving the how LLMs behave. But chain of thought is basically just, hey, explain your reasoning before you're doing something, and you can ask like every employee, hey, explain why you did this, right? What if you store that, right? That reasoning can be also used as data. So I think what we change now, we just don't have like just data. We now have opinions, and you can build automation on opinions. So imagine you have opinions, and then you have opinion on opinion, right? We're going really meta now, but it opens a whole new paradigm, right? A whole new paradigm how you approach things, right? Because before you would not have opinions, right? You might have somebody wrote a note, hey, I did this because of this and that, but nobody's doing that, right?
No, that's very difficult. Yeah.
It's very difficult, right? And that's wrong in CRMs in general, right? People don't want to go in and manually type in stuff, right? It needs to happen automatically. But AI would do it, right? It doesn't, like, it's really accommodating. It will say, hey, I will also write you why I decide to do this. I can also write you in different languages why I decide to do this. Like, that's really interesting. Like building opinions on opinions, right?
Well, not opinions. It's like chain of thought, right? Reasoning. We're building reasoning on reasoning, right? So it's like, and kind of this is building up. So it's not opinions, it's reasoning that we're taking certain context, and then we're, as part of the memory, we're adding the reasoning of why we did something. So imagine now instinctively, like if I adopt this as how humans learn, right? We learn by trial and error, but a lot of the stuff that we intrinsically have it because it's ingrained in our brains from evolution that, hey, don't eat something that smells bad, right? It's like that's in our brains. That's like ingrained in our brains. But that's something that's evolution. So what we're saying here is that we're providing that learning ability and the reasoning. So when we go back is like, oh no. We did this because something that smells bad can be rotten, right? And we don't eat rotten stuff. So the reasoning part is ingrained in there. And then now when we go back, it's like, oh, I know exactly what that is because we're starting from scratch. Think about it, starting from scratch, but we need all this knowledge that has been learned before in there. And that's where the context, really long context window becomes really important for us.
Yeah, or because LLMs become cheaper and cheaper to run, and really smart LLMs become really cheap to run. So you can run them at scale of millions. You can even have an LLM before the actual decider, right? What needs to happen. That will kind of like filter the relevant data for this current problem. So you might have a really, really smart and expensive LLM, and not so smart, but good enough to kind of detect what's relevant in data, filter out half the data, reduce it to kind of like a scope that you can manage, and give it to the other one to kind of focus on. So there's ways you can build. These are like systems, right? You can build as many components as you want to pre-filter, aggregate, route, right? So you can do all of that. Like it's unlimited in terms of imagination. But again, find problems first to solve, and then solve those problems, and then you'll see patterns, right?
So the last part that we can discuss is like, okay, of course, now other folks are gonna be like, you know what? No. What happens if the message that gets sent out is really bad? Like, how do we trust? Like, so how do we think about trust and security, right? Trust, and you can talk about ethical, considerations or privacy concern, or like this idea of trust and privacy.
Sure. So there's different angles here. So first, I'll go with running actions that you might not, that are risky, right? So you might have certain actions that you don't want to happen without your approval. And if you think about this, how that will happen again in current systems is you'll just get a notification. So you can think of it, imagine as a inbox where AI is, for example, writing you and telling you, hey, I want to do this, do you approve? I want to do this, do you approve? And again, you can build it different ways. And it can also be based on your principles. So for your company, like, hey, sending out an email to a student is a risky thing for us. We want to validate each one that we send out before we want to be kind of like rest assured that we're out to work, right? But again, initially you might want to do this for just a couple until you see that it actually works, right? Because a lot of people still have skepticism that LLMs can actually do a good job about this.
So we're surfacing that information. So we're surfacing like basically what is happening and all the steps that are happening, and we're adding the opportunity for the human to be on the loop so they can interrupt or approve or stop. Yep.
It can run in different ways. So there will be two modes. One will be, hey, run just runs on its own, and you can observe what's happening anytime you want, and you can even stop it and say, hey, it's not good, and even provide feedback. So if you think that it choose the wrong path, you can say stop it and say, hey, by the way, you choose the wrong path. This is why, do something else, and it will kind of recover from there. So you're able basically have a checkpoint at any point in time, and be able, hey, continue from here. By the way, you did a good job here, bad job here, and kind of give it feedback like you would do for a staff member, if you want to. Second mode would be initially to run like in an audit mode where you don't want it to do critical actions that you would mark as critical, and you will need to approve them. And that can be right now in the platform, but we're even thinking some ways of, imagine if it sends you like a text message on an app, for example, or something like that. So it's easy, like just a small notification that you can approve or not. So, and then you can think we can build more automation on top of that, like AI that analyzes your current task inbox and like surfaces the most important things for you to act on. So the thing is, you need transparency. So that's first. You need transparency and control. So you will be able to stop them. You'll be able to give them feedback, and you will also be able to have certain actions be guarded whether you need to approve. That's the trust part. But there's also privacy. So there's also privacy. So because there's a lot of data, right? A lot of data is sensitive. You can't really send that to every LLM, right? There's LLMs that run locally where you can, but certain LLMs that are really powerful are not able to be run locally. You need to send them to certain providers. Even though they say explicitly that they don't train on the data, you sometimes cannot trust, right? So you need to obfuscate or basically remove the PII data from it. And if you think for basically 99% of problems out there, you don't need the PII data to kind of decide what to do in these cases. Yeah, so it's easy to mask that. Just replace first name, last name, email, SSN, everything. Just remove that or replace it with just, Jane Doe, John Doe, and send it over.
In our case, we have tokens that actually take care of a lot of that stuff. Like those are some like that. We have a whole tokenization system that we use to replace that at the time of when it's needed, right? When the message is shown to a user, when the message is sent out.
So in this case, if for example you would say, hey, write an email up for this student, instead of like sending the data of the student, you would say, hey, we don't send the first name last name email, but we do put tokens and say use tokens instead of it. So instead of saying hey Peter, it would say hey first name, and then when the engine, because eventually the system takes over, system can replace the actual data. So that's around the privacy.
That's the really interesting things when I said before, where it's like building it, like we already have all of the pieces that we need.
Yeah.
In terms of like the security, the data and the context, like all the analytics and all the data that's coming in. Like we have all those components. We have the ability and the security to obfuscate data because a person can do that right now. We can set up a communication and you can add tokens in there and all those pieces. So all we're talking about is like, okay, we're overlaying now the AI to make those decisions at scale at the individual level. So every student can have, they can have a journey that is truly personalized to them with messaging, content, different actions, essentially being proactive in their journey and the goals. Now, this has been the culmination of kind of our journey and what we built, this whole idea of a segmented one and next. I know JC and I talk about this all the time. This idea of next is like, what do you do next, right? And we were pretty naive like 10 years ago when we were thinking about that idea of marketing automation systems. Like, wouldn't it be really nice to know like what to do next on this student and then make that dynamic and send it? So now it's like we're kind of culminating in that. Peter, this has been a fascinating kind of conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I know that I kind of gave you a little trouble in saying you got to get a little bit deeper into this, but I appreciate your technical expertise on this one. I had fun. Hopefully, everybody kind of gets an idea of what we're building here. And if you haven't listened to part one, I highly recommend you go listen to that because that gives you a kind of a view on how the systems are working and why we need the systems. and kind of what we're building, right? There's a lot of buzz and there's a lot of hype out there, but we're trying to demystify a lot of that and trying to bring it down so you actually understand it. And for folks who are actually building it today and who are battling with LLMs and who are, looking at reading all the papers and what are the best techniques and the capabilities, I don't think you could have a better guest in here. So thanks, Petar. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Artist.
All right, everybody. Till next time. Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed leaders and professionals like you find their next big idea. They feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Brian Gross, and many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.